what is the one thing that has surprised you about your life?
Oh, one thing, wow. Well, I'm surprised by the whole thing, honestly. I certainly didn't expect for any of these things to happen, honestly. Yeah. I just knew, I knew I wanted to be involved in technology. In fact, the only reason I started a company back in '95, an internet company, was because I couldn't get it. There were only a few internet companies, and I couldn't get a job at any of them. I tried to get a job at Netscape, and sent my resume in and tried hanging out in the lobby, but I was too shy to talk to anyone. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll have to start a company because I can't get a job anywhere.
Thank you.
How should someone figure out how they can be most useful?
Whatever this thing is that you're trying to create, what would be the utility delta compared to the current state of the art times how many people it would affect? So that's why I think having something that makes a big difference but affects a sort of small to moderate number of people is great, as is something that makes even a small difference but affects a vast number of people. Like the area under the curve. Yeah, exactly. The area under the curve would actually be roughly similar for those two things.
Yeah, so I noticed I picked up two kind of themes from what you were discussing. One was somewhat audacious goals, and the other was, I don't think I heard you use the word profit in anything that you spoke about. You seem to be, each thing is pointed at like reinvigorating an industry or bringing back space missions. How much of your success do you attribute to having really audacious goals, or versus just not being focused on the short term, money coming in or investors?
Unfortunately, one does have to be focused on the short term and money coming in when creating a company, because otherwise the company will die. So I think that a lot of times people think like creating a company is going to be fun. I would say it's not. It's really not that fun. I mean, there are periods of fun, and there are periods of where it's just awful. And particularly if you're the CEO of the company, you actually have a distillation of all the worst problems in the company. There's no point in spending your time on things that are going right. So you only spend your time on things that are going wrong. And there are things that are going wrong that other people can't take care of. So you have like the worst. You have a filter for the crappiest problem in the company, the most pernicious and painful problem. So I wouldn't say I think you have to feel quite compelled to do it, and have a fairly high pain threshold. And there's a friend of mine who says like starting a company is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. There's some truth to that. The staring into the abyss part is that you're going to be constantly facing the extermination of the company. Because most startups fail. It's like 90%, arguably 99% of startups fail. So that's the staring into the abyss part. You're constantly saying, okay, if I don't get this right, the company will die. And then the eating glass part is you've got to do the problems. You've got to work on the problems that the company needs you to work on, not the problems you want to work on. And so that's you end up working on problems that you'd really wish you weren't working on. And so that's the eating glass part. And that goes on for a long time.
So how do you keep your focus on the big picture when you're constantly faced with, we could be out of business in a month?
Well, it's just a very small percentage of mental energy is on the big picture. Like you know where you're generally heading for, and the actual path is going to be some sort of zigzaggy thing in that direction. You try not to deviate too far from the path that you want to be on, but you're going to have to do that to some degree. But I don't want to diminish the. I mean, I think the profit motive is a good one if the rules of an industry are properly set up. So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with profit. In fact, profit just means that people are paying you more for whatever you're doing than you're spending to create it. That's a good thing. and if that's not the case, then you'll be out of business, and rightfully so. Because you're not adding enough value. Now, there are cases, of course, where people will do bad things in order to achieve profit, but that's actually quite unusual. I mean, because usually the rules are set up mostly correctly. Like not completely, but mostly correctly.
How do you spend your days now? Like what do you allocate most of your time to?
My time is mostly split between SpaceX and Tesla, and of course I try to spend a part of every week at OpenAI. Basically half a day at OpenAI most weeks. But other than that, it's really
And what do you do
SpaceX
when
and
you're at
Tesla.
SpaceX or Tesla? Like what does your time look like there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think a lot of people think I must spend a lot of time with media or on businessy things, but actually almost all my time, like 80% of it is spent on engineering and design. Engineering and design. So it's developing next generation product. That's 80% of it.
You probably don't remember this. A very long time ago, many, many years, you took me on a tour of SpaceX. And the most impressive thing was that you knew every detail of the rocket and every piece of engineering that went into it. And I don't think many people get that about you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think I'm kind of a business person or something, which is fine. Like business is fine, but but really it's, it's like at SpaceX, Gwynne Shotwell is Chief Operating Officer. She kind of manages legal, finance, sales, and kind of general business activity. And then my time is almost entirely with the engineering team working on improving the Falcon 9 and the Dragon spacecraft and developing the Mars colonial architecture. And then at Tesla, it's working on the Model 3 and some in the design studio, typically half a day a week, dealing with aesthetics and look and feel things. And then most of the rest of the week is just going through engineering of the car itself, as well as engineering of the factory. I mean, I do think that, in terms of creating a company, what Edison said, which was like it's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration is true. So a lot of it in creating a company is execution. Like you start off with an idea, and that idea is mostly wrong. And then you adapt that idea and keep refining it, and you listen to criticism. Some criticism you discard, try to discard the wrong criticism, try to listen to the correct criticism, and then engage in sort of recursive self-improvement and constantly refining it and making it better. And you have to work super hard, and that's very important. And then just keep iterating on a loop which says, am I doing something useful for other people? Because that's what a company is supposed to do. A company is just a group of people gathered together to produce a product or service. And a company should only exist if that product or service is truly useful to customers.
You have to make it compelling. So,
yes, exactly.
And this is really at the key of Tesla. It is a car that you will covet, that you want to drive. That happens to be very good for the environment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is sort of general, advice I'd give to people starting companies, to entrepreneurs in general, is really focus on making a product that your customers love. And it's so rare that you can buy a product and you love the product when you bought it. There are very few things that fit into that category. And if you can come up with something like that, your business will be successful for sure. But it is generally true that innovation comes from questioning the way things have been done before.
Yeah.
And if in the education system you're taught not to do that, that will inhibit entrepreneurship. There's colonies elsewhere in the solar system and ultimately extend beyond our solar system. And so there's the defensive reason of protecting the future of humanity, ensuring that the light of consciousness is not extinguished should some calamity befall Earth. That's the defensive reason. But personally, I find what gets me more excited is the fact that this would be an incredible adventure. I mean, it'd be like the greatest adventure ever. And it would be exciting and inspiring. And there need to be things that excite and inspire people.
Yeah.
You'd have to be, reasons why you get up in the morning. It can't just be solving problems. It's got to be, something great's going to happen in the future.
Yeah. People want to be more like you.
Really?
So, and for the fate of humankind, I think it would be great to have more Elon Musks. What do we need to do to become more like Elon?
I don't know if I think it maybe sounds better than it is. There's a friend of mine who's got a great saying about creating a company. Trying to build a company and have it succeed is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. So, I mean, what tends to happen is it's sort of quite exciting for the first several months of starting a company.
Yeah.
And then reality sets in, things don't go as well as planned,
Yeah.
customers aren't signing up, the technology or the product isn't working as well as you thought.
Yeah.
And then that can sometimes be compounded by a recession, and it can be very, very painful for several years. Frankly, starting a company, I would advise people to have a high pain tolerance.
Yeah, yeah. Do you fear that maybe in this generation or the younger generation that they don't have that perseverance and grit to take on these really tough challenges?
I think some people do, and but no, I think it is definitely true that, I mean, maybe there are occasionally companies that get created where there's not an extended period of extreme pain, but I'm not aware of very many of such instances. So, but I do think that new great entrepreneurs are born every day, and we'll continue to see amazing companies get built. Yeah, but I would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of quite high difficulty. But I mean, as long as people stay super focused on creating the absolute best product or service that really delights their end customer, if they stay focused on that, then if you get it such that your customers want you to succeed, then you probably will.
All right, you have to focus on the customer and delivering for them.
Yeah, make sure if your customers love you, your odds of success are dramatically higher. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, it's sort of, I mean, certainly, listen more to critical feedback. I mean, like a lot of things I learned in college actually were pretty helpful. I mean, I think the physics approach to thinking is very good, like the first principles approach.
And you applied that broadly?
Yeah, applying the first principles approach to thinking is, I think, a good way to figure out counterintuitive situations. So I thought that was really a helpful thing to learn.
Whereas there's many things that need fixing in the world, and students here probably could think of a long list, many of which you could probably imagine solutions to using the physics first principle approach. But has there been any framework or idea you've used to filter out what you don't do, what you don't pursue?
Yeah, I mean, well, if sort of follow what I did initially was, well, you go back to like college times. I was working on energy storage technologies for electric vehicles, and that's what I was going to pursue at Stanford. Actually, was work on like advanced capacitors and batteries to improve the energy density for electric vehicles. And then the internet was kind of happening. It was clear like the internet was happening like back in like 94, 95, and I wasn't sure if what I worked on in the PhD would actually be useful. So I was really concerned that if I...
Why? Timing, or what was your intuition?
Meaning, I think it could be academically useful, but not practically useful. I think it could result in a PhD and adding some leaf to the tree of knowledge, but then discovering that, well, it's not really gonna matter. Like that's, is it going to be a good enough thing to actually be used in an electric vehicle? I wasn't sure. I mean, so it was like, I was uncertain as to whether success was one of the possible outcomes. Right. Like I thought maybe it was, but I wasn't sure. And then I thought, well, if I watch the internet get built while I'm doing this, that would be really frustrating.
So there's a sense of that eminent timing, that was the time for the internet, and maybe the other stuff could wait or be on the back. Was it always there as like one day I'll get back to that, or was it just like...
Yeah, I thought probably I'd get back to it, and did end up doing that. But yeah, I thought sort of the internet was happening, like really taking off, although most people weren't aware of it in '95, and so I figured like electric vehicle technology, energy storage technology, there'll be some sort of natural progression in that, and I could come back to it later. But the internet, was really, that was the moment to really do something. Although in '95 it wasn't obvious that you could actually make any money on the internet. This was like nobody, until Netscape went public, I think at the end of '95, nobody even thought there was like you could make a valuable company on the internet.
It wasn't as obvious as it seems now.
Yeah, like now it seems really obvious, but back then it was not at all. And then the internet is also helpful because it's anything to do with software is a low capital endeavor. So I didn't have any money. I just had a bunch of student debt. But software you can just write, like by yourself. And you don't need a lot of atoms. Like you don't need a lot of tooling and equipment, and so it's not capital intensive. So the ability to start a company, if it's software related, and it's the first company, is much, much easier.
Right.
And yeah.
It seems obvious now, but of course, the easier place to start, and then as you gain more of a personal reputation and have more personal capital, as some may or may not know, SpaceX was entirely funded by Elon for its first period, partially from, and in an era when others probably wouldn't have funded it, right, in those earliest days.
Well, and actually, I mean, what the precursor to SpaceX was not, the idea wasn't really to create a company. It was to try to figure out why we hadn't sent people to Mars. Going from PayPal to sort of the next thing, I was sort of thinking, well, is there some way to reignite the dream of Apollo? That says you have a useful company. But in a high growth scenario, you have a lot more inputs for future outputs, so that you have negative cash flow and lack of profitability, and which we currently have at Tesla. But in the long term, of course, that has to be fixed. There can't be negative cash flow in the long term, and that there needs to be a net positive output, which is sort of profits in the long term. But in the short term, when there's high growth, it isn't the most sensible thing.
When you have this thing that every employee and customer knows is the purpose of the company, how do you see that flowing through to benefits for the company?
I think having a purpose certainly is going to attract the very best talent in the world, because if there's something that's intrinsically enjoyable and the financial rewards are good, but then also it's something that's going to genuinely change the world, then I think that's a pretty powerful motivator. But I don't think like everything needs to change the world, I mean, honestly, like there's lots of like useful things that people do, and I mean, I think really it should be like a usefulness optimization. Like just say like, is what I'm doing as useful as it could be?
You're talking about the goal of an organization or a
goal in general, yeah, and just even if something isn't changing the world, if it's making people's lives better, I think that's great. And even if something's like making only people's lives only slightly better, but it's a large number of people, then kind of like the area under the curve is quite good.
So is that mathematical first principles of point utility and number?
Exactly.
The integral. Yeah. Okay.
Like I mean, sort of like one could say is like some app really making people's lives better? But if it's affecting a lot of people, even in a small way, then yeah, the sort of area is good. It's always really tricky to predict the future. I mean, some of it's pretty obvious, like computing power is going to be just crazy. And the big change is the cost of computing power. Not so much the sort of circuit density, sort of the Moore's law thing. But if you look at, say, what is the actual dollars per instruction, and that is, I mean that cost is dropping exponentially. I mean, if you think about it, like if you're making a computer, you're rearranging silicon and copper, so on a little chip, and once the capital cost of the development and the chip plant is paid for, the marginal cost of a chip is very, very tiny. So I think we'll see massively parallel computers and computing power and storage being, as much as you want.
And it's interesting. I too start with that. Like if I don't know what else to predict, but as a foundational thing, this seems like the safest starting, premise. But then, what does that ripple through to in fields like genetics and AI, which you mentioned, autonomous driving, space-related topics?
I mean, just ubiquitous computing everywhere. I think AI is going to be incredibly sophisticated in 20 years.
When does it first wake up?
It seems to be accelerating, and the tricky thing about predicting things when there's an exponential is that an exponential looks linear close up, but it's not linear. So, and AI appears to be accelerating, from what I can see.
And do you look at autonomous driving and point AIs like the Siri-like functionality as your guidepost?
Well, I had sort of a debate about someone like, is AI accelerating or not? And like he was saying, well, what's the y-axis? You know, if it's accelerating, you got t on the x-axis, but what's the y-axis? And I said, well, I thought about that, and I think you could have a recursive y-axis, so that if at any point in time your predictions for AI are coming sooner or later, that actually would help define whether it's accelerating or not.
Whatever that axis was. So you mentioned look at the
It's
net
sort of a
change.
recursive axis. Like, so if in any given year, if you find your predictions are going further out or coming closer in, that actually, you know, is one way to think of acceleration. Because otherwise, what's the qualitative or quantitative measure of AI? And I can certainly see that with autonomous driving. You know, 3 years ago, I thought it was 10 years away. And then 2 years ago, I thought it was 5 years away. Now I think it's 3 years away or less than 3 years away.
Wow. So, and when you say away, like released to market, available for consumer adoption, as opposed to prototyping?
No, I mean like the technology works. There's a sort of second question as to when regulators would approve it.
Yeah.
But like
Good luck with that.
the technology works as a general solution. So like autonomous driving, like basically
Across
works
the board.
anywhere.
So it could be sooner for point things, like highway only or...
I mean, highway only, we're already in public beta with this at Tesla. So we'll be hopefully in the next several weeks releasing to all of the cars that have the autopilot hardware, which is all cars built in like roughly the last 12 months. So for sure, ubiquitous computing, AI that's beyond anything like the public appreciates today. I think we'll have most of the new vehicles being produced being electric, and we'll probably have a supermajority of energy being produced being sustainable. So I think we're headed
Solar
towards a good
primarily
track.
in your mind?
Primarily solar, yeah. I think that those are sort of some good things. Like I think we'll be hopefully on a good path for sustainable energy. Sooner is always better, but I think by 2035, I think we'll be substantially, like most of transport, most of new energy being produced will be sustainable.
Broadband everywhere?
Broadband everywhere, yeah. And hopefully a small base on Mars, or a small city on Mars in 20 years, yeah. I think,
City, did I hear?
Well, okay, fine, town, village. Hamlet.
I mean, that's exciting. I mean, that could get people fired up about the future.
Yeah, I do. I agree, exactly. I mean, so for sure, Mars and sustainable transport and like those items, I think are really, and sustainable energy, those are, I think, really cool things. I mean, in terms of getting excited about it, I mean, it's like, I think we'll probably start seeing like more like truly cyborg activity, like human brain like brain-computer interfaces.
Okay.
Like there's
Alongside the AIs that are purely synthetic?
Yeah, I think so.
It's the only way we can relate, I think, and have a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, there are amazing things happening these days. Like they've been able to figure out how to do an artificial hippocampus in rats and monkeys, and now they're looking at doing that to solve severe epilepsy. About half of severe epilepsy cases originate in the hippocampus, and by having sort of an artificially augmented hippocampus, they can actually solve, I believe, the severe epilepsy cases.
Other board members asked, and maybe in a cheering up kind of method, with some quoting Bill Gates or somebody that said, if you haven't failed, then you're not learning, or it's a paraphrase of the quote. And I remember your reply, and I have it written as a quote because I want to put it on a placard. Given the options, I prefer to learn from success, which I think is a great comeback. And so I guess I was curious in general, what do you think of the Silicon Valley mantra, fail fast, fail often, or as Esther Dyson says, always make new mistakes, as if failure is the crucible of learning? I'm curious if you had any further thoughts on that, and that maybe off-the-cuff comment you made out there.
Well, I mean, there are many that sort of, I mean, I think there's like some entropic basis for this. Like there are many more ways to fail than to succeed. So you have to explore, I mean, particularly like for a rocket, there's like 1,000 ways to think and fail, and like one way it can work. So you could have a lot of rocket failures to explore all the ways in which it could fail. But I do think that one great thing about Silicon Valley is failure is not a big stigma. So it's like if you try hard and it doesn't work out, that's okay. Like you can learn from that and do another company, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's really one of the great things about Silicon Valley.
Interesting. Do you also, I'm curious if either on the, well, it seems to me that on the system design side, you can accommodate a likely failure of subcomponents, and so much of the elegance of, let's say, a Falcon 9 or a Falcon 9 Heavy as an ultimate incarnation of this vision of how the rocket should be built, to say, hey, parts will fail, but here's how the system can succeed. And I'm curious if there's any other thoughts along that, how to accommodate anticipated failure, and then also maybe managerially, is there ways that you motivate the team either in advance of failure to coach them on, hey, this is going to happen, or in the aftermath of failure to get them fired up to solve it and move forward when it might be dark times? And like, for example, notions like failure to launch, exploding on the pad, there's all these, it's a very visual, it's public spectacle when you have a setback in the rocket industry. And I'm curious how you manage around failure.
I mean, I think it's like quite painful and difficult, honestly, and it feels terrible. The company is sort of looking to, me to, rally them, and so I do. But I honestly feel super bad.
It's like a punch in the gut.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember it's almost like a time, like the stages of grief. I remember it.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly with rockets. It's just space is hard, and rockets tend to fail, unfortunately. And even when you've got like a lot of really smart people working super hard to minimize the probability of failure, it's still there, and it's quite significant. And people have asked me like, well, why are rockets especially hard? And part of it is like everything has to work the first time. Like there's no, you can't do a recall, you can't patch it. It's like 9 minutes to orbit or it's over. And then you can never test the rocket completely in the environment that it's actually going to experience. So you can't fully recreate something that's moving super fast in a vacuum on the surface of Earth. Like you can only really recreate that in space.
Is that a limit of the simulation tools?
Pardon me?
Is that a limit of the simulation tools today, or is that a fundamental?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's any error between the simulation and reality, and there's always some amount of error, then that can result in a failure. It's a really, really tricky one. It's like, in a software analogy, it would be like if you had to write a whole bunch of software modules and you can never run them together, and you couldn't run them on the target computer. Like when you're testing them, you'd have to test them individually and not in the actual computer that they're going to run on.
Gotcha.
Then you put all the modules together, run it for the first time in a completely different or very different computer, and it has to run with no bugs.
That is difficult.
Yeah.
The software analogies to rocket design are deep. The modular reuse, I mean, there's many of these. Like, for those who aren't familiar, it's not like this is an aerospace engineer by traditional training coming, but is in fact radically changing the industry. I think applying a CS perspective to industry after industry, I'm like, how would a computer scientist or a physicist approach the problem, which oftentimes is a solution very unlike the industry incumbents. There's a certain elegance to it, at least from the outside. What do you look for in design? And related, if you'd like, what do you look for in art? Design might be more immediately relevant, but
I mean, you want to make something beautiful. You want to trigger whatever fundamental aesthetic algorithms are like in your brain. You have, I think, some intrinsic elements that represent beauty, and that trigger the emotion of appreciation of beauty in your mind. And I think that these are actually relatively consistent among people. I mean, not completely. Some people not everyone likes the same thing, but there's a lot of commonality. But I think it is important to combine aesthetic design with functionality. Like if you say what was really hard about, say, the Model S or the Model X, was to combine aesthetics and utility. So to balance the two. You can make a car look very good by giving it sort of certain proportions, like making it sort of low and slim and if you do that, the utility is significantly affected. So the big challenge with the, say, the Model S was trying to figure out how do we get 5 adults plus 2 kids, because we want to have sort of a 7-seater. The big challenge with the S was having a car that had a high utility and looked good, and the same with the X. So to make a sports car look good is relatively easy, but to make a sedan look good or an SUV look good is quite difficult. And I think another principle is you want to have it feel bigger on the inside than it looks on the outside. And that's also a really hard thing to do. And then really pay attention to the little details, the nuances of design and shape and form and function, and the way it looks in different lights. And
When something's off, the little thing, how do you experience that?
it drives me bananas. Yeah. I mean, the problem is, like, if you can train yourself to pay attention to the tiny details. I think almost anyone can. Although this is a very much a double-edged sword, because then you see all the little details, and then little things drive you crazy. But like most people they don't consciously see the small details, but they do subconsciously see them. Like you sort of, your mind takes in a gestalt of the overall, an overall impression, and you know if something is appealing or not, even though you may not be able to point out exactly why. And it's a summation of these many small details.
So most of us experience it as oh, I think that's ugly, or I think that's beautiful, or like, wow, that's elegant, but
Yeah.
can't break it down. You mentioned something in passing, like you can train yourself in this, though?
Yeah, you can train yourself, I think. You can make yourself pay attention to why. You're essentially bring the subconscious awareness into conscious awareness.
God, I wish I could do that. How do you do that?
Just pay really close attention.
Almost like a meditation on the object, and trying to find the details, like, why do I not like this? Is that what?
Yeah, just look closely and carefully. And for any given object, it's geometry. There's always something wrong somewhere all the time.